Remember a few years ago when everyone was talking about a retail apocalypse? Physical retail was dead or dying, they said. Malls were going away. If you wanted to invest in brick and mortar, you'd be better off incinerating a big pile of cash. But as it's turned out, well, not so much. Remember when venture capitalists plowed many millions of dollars into many hundreds of startups on the premise that so-called unicorn brands could be built as an online-only retailer? We don't need no stinking stores, they said. Well, as has become ever more obvious, most of the once and future unicorns are quite wobbly, or even extinct. And many are counting on brick and mortar to be their ticket to what's proven to be rather elusive profitability. Remember how retail futurists and certain large consulting firms said that we'd soon get to 50% e-commerce penetration, a prediction that they doubled down on when they boldly stated that the pandemic would cause 10 years of acceleration. While hyperbole is the greatest thing ever, as the dust settles, it's clear we've only seen a year or two of digital acceleration, and many sectors are close to or on the same trend line they were pre-COVID. As a keen observer, regular commentator, and strategic advisor on where shopping is headed, I pay more attention to these sorts of prognostications than the average bear, particularly since some of them are advanced by my friends and colleagues. But I am also, I like to think somewhat famously, a card-carrying, bullshit-dispelling enthusiast. And when this sort of nonsense gets advanced as insight, I suddenly and clearly hear the words of Logan Roy from Succession ringing in my ears.
I love you, but you are not serious people.
Welcome to a special Remarkable Retail Podcast summer series focused on what leaders need to do to help their organizations win the future and leap to higher ground. I'm Michael LeBlanc, and in this 6-part limited series, Steve will be unpacking key lessons from his new best-selling book, Leaders Leap, Transforming Your Company at the Speed of Disruption, available everywhere books are sold.
If you're of a certain age, you'll likely remember the scene from the classic movie Monty Python and the Holy Grail, where King Arthur engages in a sword fight with the Black Knight. During the battle, Arthur eventually cuts off both of the Black Knight's arms.
You are indeed brave, Sir Knight, but the fight is mine.
Oh, had enough, eh?
Look, you stupid bastard, you've got no arms left.
Yes, I have.
Look!
Just a flesh wound.
Now, at one level, we might appreciate the Black Knight's grit and determination. But to say that he is in the throes of massive denial would clearly be the understatement of all understatements. Right about now, you're probably saying to yourself, cool story, bro, but what does this have to do with accelerating retail transformation? Well, I bet if I asked you to name a dozen retail brands from the recent past that, much like our friend the Black Knight, talked a good game and insisted that everything was going just fine, when in reality they were slowly bleeding out, you wouldn't have much trouble. As I dig into in my new book, Leaders Leap, it's not just the high-profile flameouts that concern us. When we don't wake up to the critical shifts that expose our organizations to potential risks or might unleash exciting new growth opportunities, we might easily fall into the zone of irrelevance. In fact, it's depressingly easy to point to the brands that were slow to change and are now gone or gasping for air. Less obvious, perhaps, are those that never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity, or are constantly playing from behind. If you find yourself only recently talking about unified commerce, or how digital and physical need to work in concert, or maybe the importance of personalization, or a whole host of other topics and trends that get a lot of airtime at conferences or in the press, then what this reveals is that you aren't serious enough about doing the work. Leaders that have been paying close attention, that are expansive in their thinking, that focus on the right things, are literally years ahead of you. It's time to get serious about closing this gap. In this episode, we'll explore why the work of meaningful transformation is serious work, and why it requires that we become serious, courageous leaders who break through our denial, wake up to new and emerging realities, and ultimately do what it takes to position their organizations to aim higher, move faster, and act more boldly. But what does this mean exactly? What do we have to let go of to get unstuck? How do we see things differently and more expansively? What practices do we have to adopt to help future-proof our organizations? What do we have to wake up to and radically accept that will create the conditions that position us to make the leaps we must? So let's unpack a few insights and concepts that can help you and your teams become serious people doing the serious work of accelerating transformation. First up, as the iconic brand The Doors remind us in their classic song Roadhouse Blues, the future's uncertain and the end is always near. We live in an increasingly VUCA world. As you may know, VUCA is an acronym for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. Whether we like it or not, the future is happening, but it's harder and harder to have any confidence about where things are headed. As we talked about in an earlier episode, this reality demands that we embrace uncertainty and find ways to navigate it. This means realizing that not all who wander are lost, and that we must move from a mostly fixed mindset to one that is far more agile. And depending on the speed of disruption in your competitive sector, the expiration date for your business model may be quite near or perhaps not so much. But all business models do in fact eventually fail or decay. This is something to accept and address, not fight with or ignore. Second important concept. Serious people actively break through their veil of denial. As the terrible joke goes, denial ain't a river in Egypt. But as we touched on earlier, denial is pervasive and pernicious. Without waking up to the truth, however difficult, we're in no position to take the actions we must. Think about how many brands were asleep at the wheel that didn't wake up to new realities for many years and ultimately saw their brands fall from once lofty heights. Folgers went from being the top U.S. coffee brand to letting most of the value in the morning beverage market be captured by Starbucks and others. Sears, where I started my retail career, was once the world's biggest retailer with overwhelmingly dominant and highly profitable market share in major appliances and home improvement. Yet they mostly watched as Home Depot, Lowe's, and Best Buy all became far more valuable companies, and Sears began its slow march into oblivion. Blockbuster was once the singular name in home entertainment content and valued at more than $5 billion. Now it's down to just one store in Bend, Oregon, should you find yourself in the neighborhood, and Netflix has become the dominant force. And on and on. So maybe what's ailing your organization is more than a flesh wound. And it's worth remembering that Band-Aids don't fix bullet holes. Another enabler to doing the serious work of transformation is seeing that what got you here won't get you there. In fact, it might actually hold you back. Whether we're talking about Netflix, Uber, Airbnb, or any number of companies that have gone from a standing start just a few years ago to becoming highly valuable brands, we can see that they employed a completely different set of skills and perspectives to the products and services that they created and have now grown to dizzying heights. In stark contrast, the companies engaged in timid transformations tend to rely on tired old playbooks in a desperate attempt to address growing and potentially ruinous relevance and differentiation issues. In an era of unrelenting disruption, it's pretty unlikely that old keys will open new doors. Another essential element of doing the serious work of transformation is being willing to open the aperture. It's a bit of a cliche to ask the question what business you are in, but if we look at businesses that have failed to transform or did not seize emerging new opportunities, it is often the case that they defined their competitive domains too narrowly and left the door open for insurgent brands to redefine the landscape. So we must push ourselves to be more expansive in our thinking and to focus less on incremental improvements in what we already do and focus much more on finding the innovative new solutions we wish to deliver. Adopting design thinking or human-centered design can be an important unlock here. Next, start with the customer. As we open the aperture, it's often good to anchor our work in striving to be highly customer-centric. This may seem blindingly obvious, but few organizations do it well, or they do it in a less than helpful way. If you don't measure how you are doing by each stage of the customer development pipeline, i.e., traffic, conversion, cross-sell, upsell, frequency, willingness to recommend, etc., and to do so by key customer segments, you don't have a good foundation. If you don't understand how and why you are gaining or losing share, you don't have the data to take necessary action. Another key to waking up is to skate to the perimeters of your ignorance. By this I mean becoming hyper-aware of your known unknowns and identifying important emerging areas where you need to rapidly become familiar, and then putting a learning plan in place to improve your knowledge. There are many ways to approach this, but often it's helpful to be hypothesis-driven and then drive specific actions against improving your knowledge. And we should remember, some questions can't be answered by Google. At face value, that's clear, but the takeaway is that as things are moving faster and faster, you are going to have to develop new ways to address gaps in understanding. That may mean listening to different voices or employing new information gathering techniques. It's also important to realize that some knowledge is only revealed by action. Sometimes we must get out of the stands and into the arena, which means getting less comfortable with thinking and analysis and more comfortable with actually trying stuff. Related to this idea is that we should seek insight everywhere, a concept I borrowed from reinvention expert Joe Jackman. As William Gibson has said, the future is already here, it's just not evenly distributed, which means the idea that can accelerate your journey or the force that might wound you is out there somewhere already. It might be that your competitor is exploiting it, it might be that it can be found in another country or in another sector, whether that's closely related to retail or maybe not at all. In a world where new ideas get disseminated very quickly, we can't assume that our customers only benchmark us against our direct competitors. It's increasingly common that we are compared to their last great customer experience, which may have come from a company in a totally unrelated field. Opening the aperture and proactively choosing to be more expansive in where we seek insight can be a big change for many organizations. And while it may seem expensive, it is far more expensive to get blindsided or to miss out on a reset in your industry. Several years back, I worked with a company that adopted this mindset. As they were embarking on a journey to remake the company and pursue new growth vectors, they proactively sought out outside perspectives to inform their nascent strategy. This meant bringing in experts to challenge their thinking, but it also meant taking their leadership team on a global tour of the latest and greatest innovations in customer experience. Even though they are a very well-known retail brand, much of their focus was on companies outside of traditional retail. Another key to waking up and getting serious is to eschew unreliable narrators, as I pointed to in the cold open. While important, it's not always so easy. We live in a difficult era, characterized by an incredible amount of noise. There are the consensual hallucinations, conspiracy theories, and active attempts at pushing misinformation that often get boosted by social media algorithms. There are the useful idiots and the idiocracy that has become part of the cultural zeitgeist. In Chapter 4 of Leaders Leap, I do a little riff on this, calling attention to how so many people pay attention to public figures that often have little or no idea what they are talking about. For example, the venerated venture capitalist who, back in 2013, said that in the future, stores will no longer exist and that all shopping will be done online. Now, he was smart enough not to say when that future might happen, but since he made that prediction, sales through physical stores have only grown, and many thousands of stores continue to open each year. Or how about the longtime CNBC host, who is often so bad at giving investment advice that he is known for his reverse Midas touch and frequently gets roasted on social media for his many shockingly bad calls.
This is it. I'm going over the top right here. I am buying the market right here, right now, because I know more than anybody.
And please, don't even get me started on the former U.S. president who spews a seemingly nonstop blizzard of bullshit. As we try to parse the signal amid all the noise, it can be helpful to ask ourselves, cui bono, which is a Latin expression that essentially calls us to ask, who benefits? When we do this, we may become a bit more skeptical of venture capitalists who are advocating a particular investment thesis, or we may question the narratives pushed by certain technology vendors. And of course, when we understand folks' political agendas, we may dig deeper to understand whether we are getting skewed information or alternative facts. Lastly, let's briefly talk about the concept of turning pro. If we're rigorously honest, we can see that companies that have gone away or are currently struggling mightily approached PhD-level problems with grade school skills or simply neglected to do the work that matters. The concept of turning pro, first shared by Stephen Pressfield in his iconic book The War of Art, and further unpacked in his follow-up Turning Pro, Tap Your Inner Power and Create Your Life's Work, is about knowing and honing our craft. It's about doing the hard, often uncomfortable work needed to increase the odds that we accomplish what we set out to do. It's about showing up even when we don't feel like it or when the conditions are far less than ideal. It's about being disciplined, cultivating resilience, and establishing a regular practice. I like to quote legendary author W. Somerset Maugham on this. I write only when inspiration strikes. Fortunately, it strikes every morning at 9 sharp. When I talk about turning pro, some folks push back and say, this seems to fight with what I say about adopting beginner's mind. But there is no contradiction. Beginner's mind is an attitude of openness and stands in contrast to an expert's tendency to have a limited field of vision. Turning pro is about doing the work in a committed and disciplined fashion. It's about accepting that when things are evolving so quickly and so dramatically, it is often incredibly hard to know what to do. Our only hope of moving forward with any alacrity is to get serious about the challenge. Figuring out where we devote our time, talents, and treasure is incredibly important, and going deep is essential. Ultimately, there is not a good return on ignorance or confusion. There is no dividend to be paid on narrowness of vision. To drive our strategic growth agenda forward, we must develop a clear, well-informed view that's rooted in reality, not false prophets, that emerges from doing the serious, hard work required to transform at the speed of disruption. This all ladders up to increasing our level of discernment. Discernment is a superpower we must cultivate and practice, and it is discernment that separates the pro from the amateur, the serious from those who are just along for the ride or dancing through life. Let's be clear. I will always love you, but if you want to win the future, it's time to get serious. At the end of each episode of this special series, I'll offer up a few questions to help you and your teams discuss the potential impact of the themes I've covered. Here are this week's questions for you to explore. Number 1. Within the last 5 years or so, what are 3 major trends you and your team were slow to appreciate the significance of? Why did this happen? Were there any unreliable narrators that led you astray? Number 2. What percentage of your time and other resources are invested in learning about and exploring nascent or emerging trends or shifts, be they customer, competitive, or technological, that may have significant potential impact beyond a 3-year horizon? Number 3, what sources of data, insights, and counsel are you employing to inform your growth strategy? Are these broad enough, deep enough, and/or diverse enough to provide more expansive perspectives? Number 4, do you have a strategic learning plan that has clear goals, defined accountabilities, and adequate resourcing? If not, why not? And number 5, what are the current or emerging areas where you feel inadequate in your knowledge and your ability to glean actionable insights? What would it take to meaningfully deepen your capabilities? Next week, we're back to discuss why playing it safe is often the riskiest choice of all. We'll see you then.
You've been listening to a special Summer Leaders Leap bonus edition of the Remarkable Retail Podcast, hosted by Steve Dennis and produced by me, Michael LeBlanc. Season 9 of the Remarkable Retail Podcast returns in its usual format on September 10th. Follow us wherever you enjoy your podcast, and don't forget to drop us that 5-star review. Safe travels, everyone.